All right, there's so many of you. Why are you here? Today I really want to talk to you about something that I find really interesting. I thought this title was really funny like 2 months ago, but now I'm like, oh, I could take it or leave it. Subverting game genres. I think I roguelike you. I hope this makes sense. I'm very tired, as I assume all of you are. Unfortunately, there is audience participation and you will be required to make a lot of noise. So I hope you're not too sleepy. So I want this talk to start a discussion. This is my favorite GIF of all time. It's called Think Opera, if you want to steal it. So I want this to start a discussion about what genre is. I don't want to stand up here and be like, this is what genre should be, because it's such a fluid concept. Not any one person can decide what our genres mean to us and what they mean mechanically. It's more that we have to start thinking about this critically as designers and developers. I mean, I have a lot of thoughts and opinions and hot takes. I've got air horn sound effects in here as well, that I will tell you at great length, but this is a really interesting design conversation that is ongoing and I feel is a particularly good point in our industry at the moment to have it. So I'm not going to say anything is just how it should be, but these are just my thoughts. Take them or leave them, I don't care. Hi, kia ora. I'm Lucy. I'm the studio and creative director of Starcolt, which is a game studio based in Wellington, New Zealand. We're relatively new. I established the company in December last year, and we're now like 5 people strong in our core team. They're all pretty awesome. I think they're pretty much all here apart from Alex, which is great, and Brianna. Previously, I worked at companies like Ubisoft, at Pickpock in Wellington. I've taught for 2 years. Anyone in here that's a tertiary lecturer, you'll understand. And I've done a couple of other things. I've freelanced and I've done UI UX contracting. My main wheelhouses are user interface, user experience, and game design, though of course if anyone's in a small studio you'll end up wearing like a million hats and you'll do like sound design or like, I don't, but you'll end up doing other things. And I like to make and play and like games that do weird things with genres. I found that a lot of my work kind of sits outside established genres, and so this whole concept has been an ongoing discussion for me as a designer as well. You may recognise me from such films as my talk in GCAP 2017 when someone dropped an entire tray of cutlery outside the door and shouted a really rude swear word with great comedic timing. So like this is some of my professional work at my former studios. I've worked on titles like Settlers Online at Ubisoft. I was the lead UI designer for Dungeon Inc. from Pickpock. I've worked on Farlap Horse Racing Challenge and I Am Monster. So like this is all, they're all super awesome games and they all fit quite neatly inside genre as well. But when I looked at the stuff I make personally, it's just a hot mess. For Ludum Dare, like 5 years ago, I made a RPG that was combined with a slot machine. So you would like just continually pull the slot machine, put coins in it and get random encounters, which was, I thought it was kind of cool, but I have no idea what kind of genre I put that in. I made a card game, which is dating for penguins, which is called Huddler. It is a cooperative card game where you build a huddle inside out and you've got to match penguins by their interests. You can see this one likes fishing and golf. Again, not really sure what that falls under, but I thought it was fun. One of the first games I made on my own was called Bras and Balls, and it was a marine biology quiz game where you're making a bra for a mermaid who has to go to like a debutante ball. And you've got to answer marine biology facts to put like, I don't know, there were crabs and there was like driftwood for straps. It was like very unergonomic, but it was great. I've also worked on projects like For Rent, which was like a kind of hidden object visual novel game where we were trying to attempt to educate people on home health. If anyone's been to Dunedin, New Zealand, you know the flats there are terrible. They're super mouldy and gross, and often when people are moving out of home and going to rent their first house, they don't know like they're going to be going to the doctor like 20 times that year if they live there. So it was kind of trying to educate with hidden objects what to look for when you're going to rent a house. And something I'd love to make, a massively multiplayer Starbox, where you just have a big night sky as a canvas and you draw constellations with other people, because I think that'd be dope. But like this stuff just doesn't really, like, I can't look at any one of these games and be like, that's action or that's arcade or whatever. Like it just, all of my stuff is kind of weird. And especially with indie games going the way they are, like a lot more weird stuff is happening. So we're really starting to innovate outside of like standard genres and kind of developing, you know, new niches, which is really exciting. So to kind of just discuss this, how do we define a genre? Buckle up for egregious use of MS Word art because I've never moved on for the 90s. So in games specifically, talking about genre, it's very contentious. People will argue till they're blue in the face about whether a game is action or adventure. But the most widely used game classifying system categorizes games into 8 genres. So action, adventure, fighting, puzzle, role-playing, simulation, sports, and strategy. But that doesn't really fit a lot of things. It's only like 8 boxes. So we're gonna do a quiz. All right, so what I want you to do, and hopefully this will prove my point, I'm gonna count down from 3, and I want you all to yell out at the same time what the best animal is, okay? 3, 2, 1. Okay, that was more than one animal. So hopefully this is gonna work. So I'm gonna show you some famous games that I hope most of you will know. And I want you, when I reach 1, to yell out what genre that you feel this game is. Okay? So we're going to start with an easy one. I'll give you a low ball. This is Call of Duty Black Ops. 3, 2, 1. Awesome. That was definitely more than one. Okay, we're going to get a little bit harder. This is Dead Space. 3, 2, 1. Oh, that was pretty good. Actually, I saw a lot of arguments that this was an action game, so that was good. Okay, slightly harder because you're grokking onto it now. 3, 2, 1. I don't know what this is, so I'm just really glad that you all had answers in 3 seconds because I wouldn't be able to come up with one. Let's get a little bit more serious. 3, 2, 1. Simulate. That was really good. Oh my god, I expected a lot more diverse answers for that one. Okay, last one, very topical, also the one I'm most curious about. 3, 2, 1. Honk is not a genre? Excuse me? Actually, I just said I wouldn't stand up here and say yes or no to anything, so okay, you can have honk likes. I like it. Hashtag honk likes. By the way, there's a hashtag for this talk. It's hashtag I roguelike you. So if you want to tweet any hot takes about genres or like just tweet honk like in all caps over and over again, I will definitely take great joy in that later. So a game genre is, it's several things, and it's definitely not boiled down to like one certain concept. I feel like it's a set of stereotypical mechanics or affordances that you're giving to a player. It's a vehicle to set consumer or player expectations when you describe your game in a certain way. It's a fancy marketing buzzword, and sometimes it's simply derived from a really prolific game itself. Like when we talk about a game genre, what do we really mean? Genre itself, has anyone in here done like film studies, media studies? A couple of you? Awesome. Genres are complex, like post-dated phenomena. So genres always turn up after the fact that the thing is created. And they can be completely subjective. So like horror might mean a different thing to one person than it does to another. Grouping them in objective ways is a task that lots of people have attempted. You know, humans love fitting things into neat little boxes. But they're more or less what we've grown into now. But games' rapid development and how fast we iterate outside of these labels is something that we should really be thinking closely about as creators, because it has so many knock-on effects, like how we market and how we set like target demographics and stuff like that. So here's a haphazard attempt at trying to group together these forms of genre that they can take. So when we talk about like sets of stereotypical mechanics, I mean, the first thing that jumps to mind when you describe game genre is this, right? So For instance, the term platformer, if you said to someone, this is a platformer game, they're going to think that it's probably going to involve climbing and jumping and navigating around the environment, might be 2D, might be side-scrolling, and these genres have these affordances that players assume on almost an instinctual level. In typical games of the genre, you can pick up a controller or sit down at a keyboard and you already kind of know how to play. Like, those affordances are set within you, and you know how to interact and what objects are without really thinking about it. As a vehicle to set consumer and player expectation, this is especially important when you announce a game, because that is one of your biggest marketing pushes, and the way that you describe your game genre-wise will attract a certain audience to you. Attaching a genre label to your game begins to set opinions about what your title will be like. For instance, if you describe your game as open world, players will assume from like their own established cliches that it might have invisible walls or like blockades, free of blockades preventing the player from exploring. It would have free exploration and player-centric, like emergent gameplay. Maybe a main storyline, but no pressure to follow it, a la Skyrim or something. They're usually drawn into previous hit titles of the genre as well. So for instance, if a player's first association with a genre is, say, open world with Skyrim, they might draw these opinions from that because it's such a prolific part of their genre. So it's kind of common sense. They will expect playing Skyrim, which is an open world RPG, that other open world RPGs would do like similar mechanic things. A fancy marketing buzzword. So whether you're like appealing to die-hard fans of a certain genre or creating your own genre name to catch an eye, like I backed this ages ago. It's called Classroom Aquatic, and they call it a cheat 'em up, which is hilarious. You put on like a VR headset and you're in the dolphin school and you've got to like lean over and kind of cheat on your paper with other dolphins. It's a really powerful marketing tool because it's the kind of thing that people will remember you talking about, and they'll remember that kind of phrase. I know that Boyfriend Dungeon also calls their game a shack and slash, which is pretty cool. So it's definitely like a cool marketing tool. If you can come up with like a term that's not awkward, it's something you can add to your arsenal. And like a riff on a prolific game itself, birthing of genres like commonly and do just develop from breakout hits that are established. A famous example would be when Doom came out in 1993, and a bunch of clones came out called Doom-likes or Doom clones. And it spawned things like Gloom and Marathon and Blood and Chex Quest, which someone speedrun at a GDQ a couple of years ago, and it was the best internet content of my life. But around 1997, after all of these Doom-likes came out, the term first-person shooter began to take over, especially in like discussion on Usenet groups. If anyone's old enough to remember what a Usenet group is, you're my people. In a less context-heavy way to kind of describe the mechanics, because if you say first-person shooter, you can understand what that entails, but if you say Doom-like, if you don't know what Doom is, you're like, oh, that sounds unpleasant. But only after it was originally spawned as a concept from its Doom. Other popular examples would be things like roguelikes, and people who like roguelikes love arguing what makes a roguelike. But these are primarily based off of the 1980 ASCII game Rogue. It wasn't the first of its type, but it was definitely the most prolific. And this is a genre based like specifically around dungeon crawling and permadeath, proc gen. You've got Metroidvanias, which is such a fun word. A genre characterized by like large interconnected world maps, unlockable passages, and like a side-scrolling perspective, and Axiom Verge is a really good example. And these are just subgenres that like spun off from prolific titles and have really passionate niche communities now. So let's look at our established genres in terms of PAM's products, but I've heard Aussies call this home brand, so just when you see PAM's, just think home brand, because I think that'll be easier. I was surprised to hear that there's no PAM's here, but you get the gist. So PAM's genres. So genres defined by Steam, and if anyone here has released a game on Steam, fitting your game into one of these categories can be quite painful. You've got action, adventure, casual, indie, MMO, racing, role-playing game, simulation, sports, and strategy, which I feel is still quite a narrow band of definitions for what we're making. As defined by Steam users, these are the most popular tags. Single player, violent, gore, great soundtrack, nudity, atmospheric, 2D, puzzle, sexual content, and story rich. And as defined by itch.io, you've got kind of the same but a little bit more flexible categories that Steam had. Action, adventure, card game, educational, fighting, interactive, fiction, platformer. I couldn't fit them all on, which is like good because we can't really fit them into those few categories that Steam has. But Steam tags are often used as genre substitutes because they can be more flexible than PAM's genres, or Steam tags. So like users are generating these Steam tags and kind of classifying their games, and I don't know if anyone else is the same, but I will go more often into a Steam tag to find games that I like rather than using the PAM's genres on Steam. So it's definitely important to have your game tagged on Steam with user tags because it's so much more flexible. And until we kind of catch up with how genre is developing, we're not gonna be able to fit everything in these neat categories. Hello, all right, versus other media. So when you look at the top 10 genres in books and film, you can kind of compare them. So books, you've got like young adult, fantasy, children's, literary fiction, science fiction, middle grade. Is that like young adult? I don't know what that is, but yeah. It's a little bit similar, but especially when you come to things like film, kind of the setting becomes a lot more important, and setting is something that just is completely removed from game genre definition, which I feel like it shouldn't, but I'm going to rant about that a little bit later. So we don't fit any more Steam. Like Untitled Goose Game's the same genre as Doom 4 on Steam. Monster Prom is in the same genre as Euro Truck Simulator. Call of Duty is in the same genre as Spyro. And conversely, like when you're talking about games to someone else, like psych horror would explain more to a gamer than action. And dating simulation explains more than it's an indie game. And Space 4X explains more than strategy. Though I feel like that example is kind of weird because unless you're really passionate about strategy games, you wouldn't know what 4X strategy is. But still, like if that's important to you, that would explain it to you much better. And we encounter like a ton of problems. Like take Minecraft as an example. So like these are all different outlets that have described Minecraft in different ways. So sandbox survival, simulation, action, action adventure, adventure first person fantasy, first person action, city simulation, strategy. Like it just doesn't work. Like we're all really confused. I know we're confused in general because it's 2019 and things are terrible, but like this isn't helping, and I feel like we can do a bit better. So the issue with generic genres, I'm saying genre so much, it's like it's become a weird word to me now, is that affordance is a large part of how we currently market and explain our games, and we still use like these older terminologies. But the marketing that I feel, like again, this is very subjective, but the marketing I feel resonates most does so on like feel and specificity and tone and setting. Like you couldn't have like Goose Game, like the goose is the setting, like that's very important. You couldn't just be like, it's an indie stealth game or whatever, your honk game. Like you need that kind of like tone to draw people in, and I feel like that's something that we're lacking a lot with our genre definitions. So we need new solutions for marketing and design, to be quite honest. Let's just reinvent all of games. Why is tonal setting and narrative terminology so much rarer? And looking into a lot of the discourse around this when I was writing the talk, like some people were really like allergic to combining setting and genre in the same term. Like they really just, they don't want them to sit anywhere near each other, and I don't know why that is. Genres evolve out of multiple fields. So success, like Doom Clone was early shmups, Roguelike was Rogue, Metroid was Metroidvania, and we commonly use successful titles as examples to describe our own games to others. Like, hey, my game is like Zelda if it had Pokemon, and there was also animals that talked to you, or something. I don't know. I guess that's Pokemon. But we do this a lot, and there'll be talks where people will say, hey, like, don't describe your game in terms of other games, which is a good point. But the reason why we do that is because it sets context so quickly for us, and we don't have genre labels that can do that. So that's why we do it. We've got imperfect systems. Genres also evolve out of community. Community creates terms to better describe types of titles they're passionate about. Like you've got Danmoku, like Bullet Hells. Walking Simulator was definitely like a community moinked term. And like art games, trash games, like these are all genres that have come out of the games community, which is interesting to see how different they are to the PAM's genres. And these are just some more screenshots from the Steam tags, but they get really specific. And if you really like that kind of specific genre, then like these are great, like on-rails shooter. I, for one, think we need more Rails shooters. Music-based procedural generation, like hack and slash, dark fantasy, like you've got a mix of mechanic and setting genres here, which means that people want to classify their games by both types of thing. And to be honest, our consumers are better at defining genre than our storefronts, and that's pretty yikes. Is our solution to get more specific, or to completely reinvent the language that we're using to fit our games into? I left in the insert air horn sound effects in my notes and it makes me giggle. Genre shouldn't be independent of setting. Took a DNA test, it turns out I'm a 100% confused consumer. I feel very passionate about this, and I don't know why I've duplicated the slide because it's also my next slide, but fantasy horror versus sci-fi horror, like those two things might mean completely different things to you. And one person who enjoys fantasy horror might not necessarily be your market for sci-fi horror. So I don't know why genre and setting are separate. They shouldn't be. But horror is also kind of weird because it can be used interchangeably as a genre. Or, yeah. Anyway. Oh, I forgot I did that. Isn't PowerPoint magical? Oh, there we go. So are there any benefits from using genre definitions for your game at all? Like, I've just completely crapped over them constantly for like 20 minutes? Yeah. Stop talking and give me some takeaways. All right, cool. Here's your takeaways. So the pros of using genres to, like standard genres to define your game, like it's a common marketing tool. It sets context really quickly. Everyone knows what action, adventure, RPG, blah, blah, blah is. Like they're common words that we use with each other. And it can attract attention from superfans, like especially like I was talking about those niche genres earlier, like roguelikes, incremental games have a surprisingly passionate like user base. If you can use that terminology to market your game, that's really powerful if that niche exists. These are kind of neutral, they don't fit in either column, but like they establish rough design parameters for you. These are things that your game should have. Like, I mean, that's a good springboard for your design, but at the same time, do you want to do the same thing that everything else in that game genre has done? And also sets consumer expectations. I mean, I feel in games setting consumer expectations is always a risk, but when you use a genre term, you are starting to do that. So I'm sure like if any of you have seen like Fallout 76, like the open world, like genre debate around that has been quite ridiculous, and yeah, it's just like something to keep in mind that it might be a risk for you. It can sometimes be confusing, especially if people aren't familiar with a specific genre that you're defining. Like people might not know what a roguelike is, and the definition may not neatly fit your game. We've definitely had issues with that with our current title at Starcolt, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but it's really hard to sometimes find genres to actually market your game and tell people that it exists. And using definition can be risky with genre diehards, especially with those niche genres that people are really passionate about. If you put like a visual novel element in Call of Duty, I mean, I really wish someone would, because that would be great. But like that would kind of interrupt those paradigms of first-person shooters, and they'll be like, why is this story in my game? I feel bad because this is going to be recorded, and I just said a bunch of weird stuff. All right, but we can use these stuffy genres to our advantage because we're probably not going anywhere soon. Change takes ages to enact, and like genre is something people love arguing about a lot, so I don't have any high hopes for it changing very quickly. But sets of rules are made to be broken through subversion. We have these sets of rules. We've got genre narrative rules, genre mechanic rules, haptic interaction paradigms, and interface paradigms. And these are kind of the 4 groups that I've found that you can do subversive design through. And subversive design is really exciting because breaking or tweaking these rules allows us to throw and surprise the player, because our expectations by these genres have been set so rigidly. We have all these instinctual reactions to these mechanics. So yeah, finding subversion or pushing design towards unexpected outcomes is often like a USP or a unique selling point for your game, because it's something that gets people talking about it really easily. And it's also a hook, it's something that gets press and influencers interested in your game more, because it's doing something differently to the other 50 titles that they've reviewed in that genre. So I'm going to run you through some of those examples. So Undertale, with genre mechanic rules, is a perfect example. Like a staple of RPGs is fighting and grinding. You fight a million enemies and you get XP and you level up. So if you see this fight button, if you load this and you have no context about what Undertale's twist is, you'll just be like, okay, well, I've got to kill these enemies. It's a stereotypical way of generating conflict in game design and in RPGs, and we're starting to see more and more examples of subverting that particular trope with conflict. A proliferation of games with no loss states and with like mercy and pacifism. But Undertale is a really good example of subversive mechanic design because it takes the core concept of battles as a whole and it presents the player the option of just not participating in it. You can talk to and like comfort and hug the enemies, and this really surprises the player at this like departure from traditional grinding when you're presented with this kind of turn-based battle system. It's entirely possible that the player might not understand this subversion until later on in the game in Undertale, where the true weight of like their destruction and violence is conveyed to them. There's a bunch of spoilers, so sorry if you haven't played it, but it's been out for ages. And if you spare a lot of opponents where we'll travel, that you're kind of benevolent and nice, but if you murder everyone, they'll be like, I don't want to be anywhere near you and I'm very hostile, which is fair. Like, it'll be like that in real life. So it's a really good aha moment when that's revealed to the player, and it's really resonated with a lot of players that have experienced Undertale, this kind of like, oh, my actions have consequences, that's something to think about. Dokidoki Literature Club, so narrative rules, and I'm not the biggest fan of this game, so I feel a little bit annoyed that I have to talk about it, but you can listen to my podcast with Lauren Clinic called Love Games to find out why. But it was a breakout hit that catalyzed a lot of discussion about subversive design and player surprise and meta mechanics as well. It embodies a more traditional subversion that we see in a lot of established media like film and books, where the genre switcheroo happens like halfway through the game and the player is like, oh my god, it was so cute, I didn't expect it to turn out all murdery. And this game has had knock-on effects because of the way it's done subversive design, particularly to our game as well. So I'm excited to talk about that. But yeah, you have this cutesy game. You've got a harem of attractive ladies. It's comedic, it's cutesy, it's upbeat, and then slowly it starts to like bring out some metatextual horror elements and like really an uncomfortable sense of disquiet, and then it's just shock for the player when the traditional like slice of life tropes here are turned on their head. It also subverts dating sims and the fact that that one of the characters is interested in you romantically as the person playing the game and not the character in the game, which a lot of people found really weird, and it did really well for the kind of atmospheric horror that they were building, but I have to say nice things about it. Well, these subversions, like, without a doubt, they shot DDLC to popularity, and a lot of people were talking about it when it came out. It was also free, which helped, because money. But it was kind of interesting. If you have this one twist that you're relying on to kind of surprise the player, this twist was actually betrayed a lot by when you load a page on your Steam library and it just has the latest news and stuff, and all of the news was talking about like it's actually a horror game, and that kind of ruined the surprise for the rest of the people that hadn't experienced it yet. So when approaching subversive design, this is definitely a risk you should think about if you've got like one huge twist, and like that kind of media coverage might ruin it for other people. Should be something we're thinking about. Typing of the Dead. It's such a cool game. This is like more haptic interaction paradigm subversion. So when you look at first-person shooters, you would think that you'll be really used to WASD and clicking to shoot and all that sort of stuff. But using these controls in like unexpected ways is a little bit harder to design because we only have a certain amount of peripherals and there's only a certain amount of ways we can interact with them. But Typing of the Dead is a really excellent example of this because the shooter genre is quite rigid in how it's set out and how we use it, how we interact with it. But the player's keyboard instead becomes the gun, and strings are input into the game which become the bullets, and you take enemies down instead of pointing and shooting physically with the controls we're used to. And technically it's still a shooter, even though it's like Mavis Beacon meets Dead Space. It's still the same genre, but it's just innovating on the interactions that we're doing to complete it. And that's quite novel, and they even use it as the USP in their marketing as well, and it's mentioned in almost every Steam review. It mentions like the interaction paradigm, the knock-on benefits of like, hey, I'm great at typing now, that's awesome. And There's another game called Bounden, which is a mobile game made by a Dutch developer, which you play on a phone, and it was developed in conjunction with a ballet company, and you use the phone to like do the motions and stuff. And that's another way of kind of innovating on the way we're interacting. Dead Space. I could talk about Dead Space UI for hours, but GCAP didn't let me come here to do that. So with the interface, I could talk a lot about it, but what's most interesting is that Dead Space subverted integrating the UI straight into the game's geometry, and it's one of the earliest and most famous examples of this. So instead of making it sit on top of the game in a non-diegetic sense, they put the inventory into the game where Isaac would interact with it as he would in that kind of context. And this worked really well for them because the player's immersion remains unbroken, it has added tension of having to use the interface as he would, and it just adds to the uncomfortable atmosphere of the game because it happens all in real time as well. Like, there's no pausing in real life as much as I wish that there was. So subversion can be taken advantage of from design day one, and it really is something that you should be doing intentionally instead of like, I want to do something new, I'm gonna cram this genre in here and it'll be fine. So, all right, how does one subvert? If you're gonna say that word 100 times, at least give me something for sitting in here for 40 minutes. You have to understand genre rules before you break them. So mechanics, as designers, we know that they evoke certain responses and meanings to players. Players also have to be familiar with how a genre works before you can subvert their expectations, because otherwise they'll just be like, oh, okay, well, this is how this works for every game. If not, you need to employ a pattern system to set an expectation and then break it, and this especially applies to in-game subversion rather than full-on genre subversion. So if you tell a player you're putting them in FPS and hand them a gun in the game, if enemies approach them, they'll assume that they've got to point and shoot at them. They'll assume bullets or a similarly violent substance will come out of the gun and they will do damage in the direction they're aiming. It's important to study these paradigms and understand what they are and how a player instinctually feels before trying to subvert them, if you need to. Like, if the enemies are approaching that player, how are they animated? Do they approach in a way that is threatening? Do they look visually threatening? Is this how traditional FPS titles handle mobs? So it's really important that you look into what the common expectations are before you start fiddling with them. But subversion can also sometimes be combination. There's a lot of genre mashups going on at the moment, and that's really cool, but combining two or more genres without justification can be quite risky. And you need to make sure that any genre combinations you choose have a really common element that overlaps and augments your design rather than making it super dissonant. For instance, if you wanted like a beat 'em up combined with a dating sim, you'd probably want to combine like that stat management into the mechanics of the fighting and leveling up a fighter rather than keeping them both separate or tied to traditional aspects of their genres, otherwise it'll feel really awkward. You've got to find a way to integrate both genres' elements together in a way that fits. The benefits of subverting genre expectations. Surprising a player gives a lasting effect. Like, we're surprisingly stuck in our ways as gamers, and when we have that kind of aha moment, you see a lot of people talking about it. You feel kind of like shook, and you're re-examining kind of your perspective about how some things work. Like with Undertale, oh my god, I killed a bunch of people, that might be bad, and now I'm suffering the consequences of that. It helps us develop new genres and subgenres, and this is going to be ongoing for as long as games exist. Like, a lot of genres are born from subversion, and I think it's important that we keep on trying to push these like design boundaries that we've got. And it's also an excellent marketing tool, like I talked about. Like, generating any kind of buzz about your game is great, and the more unique things you have to talk about, the more the press will want to cover you. So that's fantastic. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Best Friend Forever, the dog game. And I feel like to set the context, I will show you the trailer because it will explain a lot of things that I don't need to.
Hello, it's me, Cheeseball. Are you tired of being sad and alone? Sick of living in squalor with no friends? Play Best Friend Forever. BFF is the most cutting-edge and only dog care simulator and dating sim hybrid. Adopt and care for your very own forever friend. That's me. Or one of the others, but shush, they're sleeping. Explore Rainbow Bay. Named the world's most dog-friendly town. Meet two-legged friends. And a four-legged friends. That's 6 legs. What a bargain. Pick up my poop.
Pick it up.
Thank you. Don't wait. If you visit bffgame.dog right now, you'll get the latest news about BFF and I'll get more treats. That's www.bffgame.dog. I'm the dog. Go now.
Alright, so after you pick up the poop, the part where he gets really angry has convinced the majority of gamers on the internet that we're actually a Dokidoki Literature Club clone. And they're like, oh yeah, it's cute, it's got dogs, but I'm pretty sure people are going to start getting murdered, which has been like really hard PR-wise to try and navigate away from. We're like, no, it's fine, no one dies, it's just dogs. Like, we just thought it was funny, okay. And also, I'll tell you a little bit about Starcolt. Like, we have defined ourselves as working on simulation titles specifically, and that is quite broad, and it's good that it's broad, so we don't have to be too specific, but we develop anything from dating sims to management simulation games. They're my favorite things to play, so I was like, making them, that would be great. But it's good for marketing to be able to fit ourselves into like a genre niche, because people that like management games like really seek them out and really seek out simulations. So I feel like it's also important to discuss like our attachment to genre at a company level as well and a developer level, rather than just individual titles. I'm gonna have to like really gun through this because I had to start late, so bear with me, buckle up. Making a new kind of dating sim. This was really hard because like there's been a proliferation of dating sims in the West. Like Dream Daddy is a really noticeable like contender in the market, along with Monster Prom. It was originally established in Japan, and like now that it's coming over to the West, we're seeing a lot of iteration with the mechanics for a Western audience, and it's really cool to see that like we're kind of innovating and subverting the genre into like its own subgenre almost. So we're kind of approaching this with a muddy interpretation of the genre to begin with. Dating sims termed in the West don't always include stat management, which they do in the East. But that was one of my favourite parts, is managing stats and numbers, because organising things is fun. So the common rules in dating sims were kind of like multiple paths, multiple love interests, stat management, player-centric character development, and like human-based stories. You're seeing a lot of parody dating sims now where you like tanks and you date other tanks, which are actually like cute girls, or like dating pigeons and stuff. And like that in itself is like either parody or subversion. I don't feel like they're the same thing. And I have a lot of opinions about that. You can ask me when I'm not being recorded. Arguably, like the core genre rule that makes a dating sim not a visual novel is the fact that you're doing stat management. Whether that's of like raising your stats, like you're going to school and you're learning something, or you're raising your attractiveness for your partner, I don't know. But like raising a number is important in dating sims, and stat management is. So the concept we had to work with was a dating sim with dogs. You don't date the dogs. This has been another PR problem. You don't date the dogs. You don't match-make your dogs. You just date people who also happen to have dogs. And rather, the dog is like an equal companion in the journey of the player. So, I mean, the easiest design would be to have a dating sim with multiple love interests, like a player-centric story about like moving to Rainbow Bay. The player character manages the MC stats to win over the love interests, the end. But this is kind of boring, and like we wanted to do something different. Like we wanted to innovate a little on the mechanics that we had. And we'd really identified the dog as the hero of the game. Like when we were showcasing at PAX West, people weren't walking past and going, oh my god, look at all of like the humans. They were like, it's a dog game, holy shit, like look how many dogs are here. And so like obviously that is our unique selling point, and we had to really hone in on that. We were on the Nintendo Indie Showcase when we announced, and like 5 minutes later the Can You Pet the Dog Twitter had like grokked that we said you must pet the dog and it's mandatory in our trailer. And it's funny because like this just kind of ramified that the dog was the hero for us. Like everyone was really into the fact that you could pet the dog. Like forget the rest of the mechanics. Like petting the dog is really important. We think it's important too, but it was interesting to see like what players like latch onto. So our design problems are things like a crowded market. There's a lot of like especially visual novels and dating sims coming out right now, but if anyone's an indie developer, you know that a crowded market is a problem that we think of constantly, and how to stand out to everybody else. The dog wasn't hero enough in that concept. You know, the dog's just kind of there for the ride, it's not important, but that's what all of the players wanted to interact with. there weren't any discernible major USPs or unique selling points. Like it's like a dating sim with a dog, but you can't really do much with it. It's just kind of there. It doesn't sound very appealing. And integrating stat management in a meaningful way is really hard. It needs to be done thoughtfully rather than just like make number go up higher at X point. So we also had 2 MCs instead of 1 because we wanted the dog to be equally as important as the player because that's how all of the players felt. So the solution we came up with was a dating sim with multiple love interests. We didn't want to change that because dating people is great. A companionship-centric story rather than player-centric about the journey of moving to Rainbow Bay and fitting in. And if anyone in here has a dog, like the dog is part of your life journey. Like it's just always there and it's always something you'll be thinking about. The player raises the dog stats instead of their own stats, which integrates strategy and narrative agency better because it is developing your relationship with the dog and augmenting that rather than just like, I'm going to leave the dog at home, I'm going to go, I don't know, get buff at the gym and go date this person. It really integrated with our story better. The end, question mark. And we've taken a lot of inspiration from things like Long Live the Queen, which is in itself a subversive visual novel simulation game. Like the protagonist repeatedly dies in like more horrifying ways, but it is like a stat management visual novel. And Princess Maker 2, which is just a fantastic game that is quite weird. So some things that we subverted in the game, and I can't show you too much, and I am looking at my producer and she's like, don't say a lot of the secret things. But yeah, we tried to subvert a bunch of stuff and like just surprise the player a little bit. For instance, character creation, we emulated an online world and subverted the concept of character creation by using an actual dating app survey to kind of like formulate how your character thinks. I actually signed up to OkCupid and did the questionnaire on there, and it is so weird. Like some of the questions they ask you are just really wacky. Like this looks weird, but like, I feel like this is only as weird as OkCupid is getting. We really wanted to create again the online world and like create like a feeling of a world that's alive rather than just like giving them a bunch of dialogue constantly in the form of like traditional visual novels. We wanted to give them like the sense that they're getting emails from the characters and things that are actually happening around them that make Rainbow Bay live. The dokidoki is what we called the little dog on the bottom right there. So the dokidoki is like a real-time companion in the game that dynamically interacts with the narrative while it's happening. The dog isn't just there for the ride. Like depending on how you train your dog, it can like growl at people when they come on the screen, or it'll be like loud and barky if it's not sociable, or it can like nip people. And like, if you own a dog, this is stuff that actually happens. You can be in the middle of a really flirty conversation and your dog poos on the floor. Like, sometimes it's just how it is. And by like integrating this mechanic in and making it actually like realistic of like how to own a dog and things that happen when you own a dog, like this has been quite surprising. Like people thought it was hilarious that their dog farted and pooped while they were talking to other people, but sometimes they just do that and you've got to work with it. And again, like we really wanted to like make use of haptic feedback, especially because we're releasing on Switch. And if anyone likes Fire Emblem, please talk to me about Fire Emblem Three Houses, by the way. Like the petting system where you like pet love interests to like make them like you more. We kind of wanted to do that, but like in a not weird way. So like petting the dog was really, really important to us, and using like that kind of haptic feedback. And this is all the while like totally congruent with our design intentions as well. In summary, game genre definitions are pretty shit. Subversive design allows for innovation and really great marketing opportunities. I feel like this can't be understated, especially with how competitive our market is right now. Done correctly, subversive design can augment your concept and elevate it as well. Like if you find a way to make something a little bit more meta, or like twist something in a way a player doesn't expect, it might resonate with them much more. And it's up to us to keep thinking about how we approach genre as designers. I think that, like I said, it's an ongoing conversation, and the genres we have today are probably not the genres we'll have next year, like user-defined ones. Steam will probably keep doing what they're doing. So with that said, are there any questions? I just marathoned that. Okay, cool. Well, that's fine. Thank you for listening to this marginally organised rant. You can tweet me here. Please tweet me Fire Emblem Three Houses memes. You can email me at my Starcolt email, or you can come yell at me after the talk. Cool.